I'm Anna,
I'm Jessica.
and this is the Paranoia Pair.
Welcome back to part 2. A quick recap. Ervil and his brother Joel ran a church together. Ervil got kicked out because he was cuckoo bananas. And this hurt his little ego, so he made his own church, stole 100 followers, and planned his brother's death. After his brother Joel died, he planned his other brother's death, Verlin, but his brother went into hiding after Ervil's followers attacked his compound where Verlin's followers lived. So naturally, he killed his best friend, Rulon Allred. Police found out that 2 of Ervil's followers were responsible for Rulon's death, thanks to his first wife, Delphina, and their son Isaac came to police. They raided 2 houses that Ervil was known to stay at in Mexico. They found Rena, Dan, and Ervil, but police let Ervil go because he didn't look like the kind of man that would have a bunch of people following him. So Dan takes the fall for Ervil, saying that he is Ervil LeBaron and the real Ervil is free. Rena starts taunting the police and tells them that they had Ervil right in their hands and they had let him go. And by the time they realize that she was correct and they made a mistake, when they go back to the house, Ervil's gone. So now the family's moving again. Some of the children are moving with Mark and his wife Lillian. The only person who knows where they're going is Mark. Eventually, they arrive at the U.S. border, and Lillian is immediately upset. Mark gets out of the car and told the Border Patrol who he was and that he was wanted for questioning for the murder of Rulon Allred. So he's immediately taken into custody, and Mark kind of smiles at the kids and waves to them in a way to comfort them and let them know that nothing bad was happening. So during the trial for Rulon Allred's murder, obviously sans Ervil because they let him go, they had the courthouse guarded. They were expecting Ervil's followers to show up and kill literally anyone. And by the way, Rena was pregnant at this time. When she's called to the stand to testify, she says that she has never heard of Dr. Rulon Allred and that she didn't know anything about the details of his murder until after it happened. The case was heavily reported on, and with that comes even more threats. This time to the jurors. One juror told the bailiff that he was scared and he had thought he was being followed. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, and before the judge reads the verdict, he says that he will not have any outbursts in the courtroom, which I could completely understand given everything that's happened. They find Rena not guilty. No witnesses could identify her, and Rena was viewed as a victim under Ervil's control. So Rena, Mark, Eddie, and Victor are all acquitted. Ramona, in turn, was never convicted of her involvement in the crime, and Dan, who was being held in Mexico, was let out as well. And this is great news for Ervil's followers because he has been saying this whole time that God will take care of them and that nothing will happen because they're doing God's will. So this feeds into their beliefs and reinforces that Ervil is God's prophet. Dan goes back to Denver to make sure their appliance repair shop is running, and he is in charge of the wives and children there while Ervil's still hiding out in Mexico. The children are put back to work, but Dan has a special announcement for them. If they work hard all summer, they will earn $50 to buy themselves new school clothes. And this was per child, which was super exciting to the kids because most of the time they were only allowed $20 a week to feed all of the kids and wives in Denver. And remember, there's 20 kids and 3 wives there. So $50 per child for clothes was like hitting the jackpot. So the kids worked hard all summer, 6 days a week, 12-hour days, and the Saturday before school's supposed to start, they still have not received their money. So when asked, they were told that there wasn't enough money. And then Dan's daughters walk in, and guess what? They had brand new clothes, and they didn't do any of the work. That same year in 1979, Ervil is still hiding in Mexico in a rural little village called Atlixo. The police are 100 miles away, unaware of his whereabouts, but the locals in Atlixo notice and they're worried because they know he's the leader of a violent cult, and just a year prior was the Jonestown Massacre, which, if you weren't aware, I don't know how, but it was a cult of about 900 people, and they all committed mass suicide. Not all of them did it willingly, though, and they did kill everybody who tried to escape. So they did not want another repeat of something similar happening, so they did something about it. They notified police, and they conducted a raid on where he was staying, beat him up, arrested him, and sent him across the border back to America. The police obviously want to talk to Ervil, and he agrees. So Ervil spends 5 hours talking with police. I guess at one point he claimed that he was the legitimate president of the United States. But when asked about the murder of Rulon Alred, he doesn't say anything. He doesn't want to incriminate himself. So he ends up getting a public defender as an attorney. And back then, they met one-on-one with no guards. And Ervil brought a legal pad with scriptures and an armful of notebooks. And Ervil, even now, is so confident that he will get off free and be protected by God. Isaac LeBaron was called to testify against his father, and he was scared that he was going to be seen as a traitor and be killed. Ervil was surprised to see that Isaac was there to testify against him. The jury came back in 3 hours with the verdict. Ervil was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder against Rulon Alred, and he is sentenced to life in prison. When his followers hear of his sentence, they think that Satan is testing them. Just because Ervil is behind bars doesn't mean that his followers aren't going to be doing his bidding. When Ervil is in prison, he's still having revelations, and they keep getting darker and more extreme. He stays up all night writing in legal pads, and Ervil is still allowed visitors, so some of his wives and Mark will come visit him and take his notebooks and sneak them out of prison with them. The followers begin to notice that something has changed in Ervil during his prison sentence. His writings stopped making hardly any sense, and in one of the writings, Ervil ordered his followers to come break him out of the maximum security prison that he was in. This is when some sense kind of flows into the minds of his followers, but not all of them. Dan and Mark refused to follow those orders, so Ervil ordered them to be blood atoned. One Sunday morning in 1981, the phone starts ringing in the Denver home. And when Anna goes to answer it, she notices her mom has already answered. Dan Jordan is on the line, and she hears him say that Ervil had been found dead in his cell. Her mom couldn't believe it, because how could God's prophet die? They all really expected him to get out of prison, and the official cause of death was heart attack, but honestly, there isn't really anything people can wholly agree on. One detective says that he suspected Ervil may have overdosed himself with medication or hit himself so hard in the throat that he had suffocated himself because the muscles in his throat were hemorrhaged. There's also suspicion that someone had killed him because, according to his attorney, he did not seem suicidal, and at the time he was only 56, which isn't a very common age to be having a heart attack. After Ervil's death, all of his writings were compiled into a book called The Book of the New Covenant of the Millennial Church of Jesus Christ. This seems like similar to those moments where you're trying to create a new email address, but everything you can think of is taken. So you do one of the suggestions where it's just like your name and then 1,000 numbers after it. Anywho, inside this book were tons of insane rants, death threats, and of course, violence. The book had a list of people he wanted killed. No surprise here, this book is basically a hit list, and over 50 people were named to be killed. But is someone going to listen and carry all of this out? The answer is yes, because of course it is. There was also talks and claims of other followers who were now the quote new prophet of God. And now the group really has split into three. One group is led by Dan Jordan, another led by Mark Chinoth, and the third was led by Ervil's oldest son, Arturo. The book of the New Covenant was being circulated within the groups, and Arturo's group was mostly made up of Ervil's children who were teenagers, and they were raised to believe that Ervil was a prophet. They also grew up isolated, abused, brainwashed, and they were also very young. They were called the Kingdom of God, and they believed what Ervil had written needed to be followed so they could be the ones to make the kingdom of God on earth. So this group of teenagers had guns and a list of people to kill. Arturo's group made money by running a car theft ring. They were really good at stealing cars, so they would go to the United States, steal cars, and bring them over to Mexico. Then they would either resell them or sell the parts. There was also rumors that his group was working with the drug cartel. In December of 1983, there's tension between Arturo and one of his followers. This follower wanted to take charge of the criminal operations, and they end up shooting Arturo in the back. This made the group get even worse. The next person in charge to take leadership of the group is another one of Ervil's sons, William Heber. William partied a lot and very much was in the criminal side of the cult. Mark never claimed to have any right to priesthood, but he was just a believer. However, he did kind of gradually edge his way out of Ervil's belief system. And Mark really wanted everyone to have full, enjoyable lives. The threat of the list, though, looms over them. His group is living in Houston, and they felt like the group had been changing for the better. They were actually happy for once. One day, Dan Jordan showed up claiming to be the next prophet, and that Mark was leading everyone to the path to hell. Dan was also having a hard time funding his group in Denver because his employees, aka the children that ran the appliance shop, were gone. They were all in Houston. And he wanted more support so his family could continue to live the nice, comfortable lifestyle they were used to. And his persuasion worked. People were leaving Mark's group to go live in Dan's. One of the daughters, Anna, who was 13, did not want to go back to Denver to be under Dan's leadership. So when she had the chance, she picked up the phone and called Lillian. Lillian told her to hurry and start walking. So she did. She hurried and started walking to Lillian's house, and she made it. Lillian then took her to a hotel and paid for her room. She also gave her some money so she could buy snacks at the vending machines and told her not to answer the door unless she heard her voice. Back at the house, the family was packing up to leave for Denver, and they noticed that Anna was missing. They looked for her in all the places that they would frequent, and when they didn't find her, they just left. When Lillian came back to the hotel room, she told Anna that her mother and siblings left to Denver, so she was safe and could go back to her house now. And this is how she escaped. She stayed with Mark and Lillian, who didn't want to be part of Ervil's cult anymore, and they didn't want to announce it because that would put a target on their back. While Anna was staying with the couple, she found a book called The Prophet of Blood, while putting away some laundry. It was about Ervil and his family. She had never seen this book before, so she read it and her blood ran cold. She could not believe that her dad had ordered the murder of all of these people. All of the moving around and everything else started to make complete sense. And this is how she realized that she was raised in a cult. Meanwhile, in Mexico, William started to arm everyone in order to avenge Arturo's death. And this wasn't just teenagers and adults. He was arming and teaching 6-year-olds to use semi automatic weapons. They then kill everyone within the group that they believe helped set Arturo up to be killed. And this is the beginning of when they really spiral into a group of complete lawlessness, as if they were holding up any kind of law before. The women began to be sex trafficked. They were molested and raped, and there was a lot of incest going around as well. Brothers were sleeping with their half sisters, and William started killing everyone who thought about leaving or voiced any doubt in the group, just like his father Ervil. Nobody was safe around William. He would kill anyone and everyone, even his own brother Andrew, which ended up turning bad for the group because he was the mechanic. And now their auto theft ring is screwed, which was their main source of income. The group lost their faith in William's position as a leader, so they tell him if he doesn't step down, they're going to make him. And he was replaced by his half-brother Aaron, who was just a teenager at the time. And he only had a third-grade education. Aaron was very devout. He instructed the children to pray more often, and he was really taking the cult back to its roots, to the church that Ervil had created, which was not great because he uses the book of the New Covenant as the centerpiece of the teachings, along with the hit list that was in it. Aaron comes up with a plan to hunt down the people on the list, and their number one target was Dan Jordan. In 1983, Dan's group in Denver, it was just not great. He used the kids as slave labor just like he did before, but it still was not enough. So he started a mission field in Utah to convert LDS members to follow him. At one point, they're not getting as many people to convert as they had hoped. So Dan and two of the wives go to the mission field. They talk with Anna's sister Celia, who they had sent to convert people, about her success rate. They go over the speeches that she's using and how she's going about trying to convince people to join their group. I guess Dan had made some kind of joke about don't make love on a squeaky bed. She didn't really understand the joke because she had been so sheltered, and she was also 16 at the time. And that night, after she had went to bed, she was woken up by her mother, and her mom began to beat her with a belt. And one of Dan's wives stood behind Celia's mother and said that she was receiving this as punishment for disrespecting the prophet, aka Dan. And then her mom handed Dan's wife the belt, and Dan's wife began to beat her. The next day, they told Celia that she wasn't fit to be part of Dan's kingdom in heaven, so she was just going to have to work full time and not continue her education. Celia wasn't happy. She really wanted to go back to school and do her senior year so she could graduate, and she even offered to work overtime in exchange, but Celia's mother had no power. So one day she came to Celia and said, "Well, I guess you better just go." So Celia called her sister Anna, who had escaped the cult a few years before, and helped her buy a plane ticket. Celia wrote her mother and two siblings letters before she left because she wanted them to remember her, and she left. Dan and his wife started hearing about the hit list in the book of Ervil's writings, but they thought that God would protect them. Well, one day they get a knock on the door, and there's 7 kids from Aaron's group at his door. They ask him to please let them in his group because William had gone power crazy and they don't believe he is being true to the faith. They say that they will work for free in the appliance shop if he takes them in. And he lets them in because he needs people to work in his shop. And he starts to carry a gun on him at all times because he doesn't trust them. This man would rather let 7 people possibly kill him than budget for groceries. I guess we all have our priorities. So now it's fall of 1987, and Dan is preparing everyone for the great deer hunt. This is when he would take all the kids camping and they would hunt for deer, which was basically the only time he would spend with the kids. And this served 2 purposes. It prepared them for the end of times so they could survive, and when they were asked to kill someone, they were already mentally prepared in a way by having taken a life before. And Dan decides that he's going to take some of the new kids with him, but not all. They go to the main camp area and set up. They build a fire, and some of the people set out in the woods and start hunting. Dan stays back with the rest of them, and that is until he needs to use the bathroom. He goes to do his business, but he leaves his gun at camp for some reason, and then everyone hears gunshots, which no one thinks anything of it because they're all out hunting for deer. Well, one of Dan's sons starts yelling, and he falls to his knees and he says that his dad is dead. Everyone's in shock because they had just seen him. The police come and start to question the LeBaron kids, which includes the new kids that Dan had just taken in. And guys, one of the new kids was Aaron. They suspect him immediately, but they couldn't find any evidence that he or any of the LeBarons had anything to do with Dan's murder. When news of Dan's murder breaks, everyone on the hit list immediately takes this seriously because they're next. Ervil had been dead for 6 years now, so they don't know who's behind this. And if they're going based on the order Ervil put them in, Mark was next. But Mark doesn't want to hide, so he just starts arming people. And after Dan's funeral, Aaron starts waving his gun around and declares himself the one mighty and strong. Could these people be any nerdier? The police responded and took Aaron into custody and charged him with disturbing the peace, but of course he gets off because Dan Jordan's wives withdraw their complaints. They didn't want him to take vengeance on them, and then Aaron just disappears. June 27th, 1988, Anna was sick on the couch. She was supposed to go to the shop with Mark and work, but they told her to take the day off. Mark and his brother Dwayne both had appliance repair shops in Houston, and Eddie Marston also had one up in Irving, Texas. Both Eddie and Dwayne get a call about someone selling used appliances, and they each were supposed to meet the person at 4 p.m., but at different locations. They each get to their locations, and at the same time, a man comes into Mark's shop. The man who walks into Mark's shop opens fire and kills Mark. Eddie is then killed by a man who pulls up driving a black Silverado truck. And Dwayne is shot dead in the driveway also by a man in a black pickup truck. But sitting in the passenger seat of Dwayne's truck is his 8-year-old daughter. The little girl starts screaming, and the gunman walks over and shoots her in the head. Back at Lillian and Mark's house, the phone rings. Anna answered the phone, and it was a man who worked in Mark's shop. He asks her if she and the kids are okay. She says yes, and he tells her that there will be a car and a truck coming to the house and that she needs to pack herself and the kids up and to get them to the vehicles as fast as she can. And they just know that Mark had been killed without anyone saying it. They get sent to a friend's house, which so happens to be the pastor of their church, and he is the one to announce to the kids that Mark had been killed. Then they find out that Dwayne, his 8-year-old daughter Jenny, and Eddie had been killed as well. The 4 murders are called the 4 o'clock murders, and apparently 4 o'clock has a meaning among Mormons. It's the time the Mormon founder and, quote, prophet Joseph Smith was killed in jail by an angry mob. The 3 men who carried out the 4 o'clock murders were all driving a stolen black pickup truck, and they all wore the same disguise, which was a blue suit and a beard. That way, if it got called in, they would all match the description. When Anna is questioned by police, she tells them everything. The hit list from Ervil, and the people of her family who were likely responsible. After that, they returned home and they had an entire SWAT team surrounding their home with motion sensor lights installed. They weren't allowed to leave the house for their safety. They were scared that since a child was killed, nobody was safe or off limits, and Lillian was likely next since she was married to Mark. In Denver, the panic is also setting in. One of Ervil's wives who were on the list, Adine, gives one of her daughters a gun, and she instructed her to point the gun out of the living room window every time her mother answered the door, and if she sees anyone holding or pointing a gun, she was to pull the trigger no matter who it was. Everyone was petrified. They knew where everyone lived. They knew where they would likely go. So one of the kids suggested going to Oregon, and they actually went. Everyone who was in Denver packed up in a caravan in the middle of the night and left. The police had made a perimeter at the funeral and burial site for the 4 members who were killed. There were snipers in trees, and people didn't attend because they were afraid of being killed if they went. Right after the funeral, FBI scooped the family up and put them in witness protection. Not long after the murders, police get a tip that a group of people were staying at an Arizona motel and that they were acting strange. When police arrive, they find that the kids are driving stolen cars. And as police are going through the cars, they find a newspaper clipping of the 4 o'clock murders from the day after it happened. They also find a map of the Houston area, and on the map, Rena Street was circled, which is the street that Dwayne and his daughter Jenny were murdered on. They also find disguises, so the police arrest them on auto theft charges, and one of the men arrested was William Heber LeBaron. Police know that these are their guys, but they're running into some issues. The big problem was that the murders match up in every way down to the description, and with American law, they had to know which person was responsible for which murder. They knew who the 3 killers were: William Heber and Richard LeBaron and Doug Barlow, but they couldn't bring them to trial until they knew who did what murder. Police in Arizona, though, aren't having any problem at all building an auto theft case against the group. And the group pleads guilty because they know they would get a lighter sentence and then they would be able to disappear after. And it would really just get the process over and done with much faster. William and Doug were sentenced to 10 years, and since Richard was a minor, he only got 3.5. But they could get out in half that time on good behavior. In January 1989, Lily ended up taking her own life. She was only 33 years old, and she died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Her 13-year-old daughter was home, and she had found her. She was one of many former followers who took their own life. In fact, 3 years after Isaac testified against his father, he had taken his own life as well. 1992, the leads for the 4 o'clock murders have slowed. Law enforcement needed someone on the inside who could help them out, and just like that, Utah law enforcement gets a call from Cynthia LeBaron, who is in Mexico. She tells a detective that things have been happening in Mexico and she and her sister were afraid for their lives, and she was willing to help them and give them information, and she would meet them in Texas. And she cuts a deal. Anything she says to them in her interview will not be used against her. So immediately, she starts talking. Cynthia admitted to her involvement in the 4 o'clock murders, and she also admitted to keeping surveillance of one of the victims. She was basically a lookout and would tell William when they would come and go from the shop. She knew who was ordered to kill who, and she says that Aaron is in charge of the group and William was the hitman, and the murders had been planned for 2 years. She also says that the group killed Dan and they played into his sympathies to get let into the family. They knew about the hunting trip and thought it would be a great time when Dan would be isolated to take more advantage. So Aaron told William where they were going to be, so when everyone was interviewed, they had someone to say they were with them when Dan was murdered. They then prosecute everyone they have in custody. Aaron, however, remains on the run. William and Doug get life sentences for the 4 o'clock murders, and Richard reaches plea agreement and gets only 5. In 1995, Aaron was finally arrested in Mexico and he was extradited to the United States. He was then tried and convicted to 45 years in prison. Colonia LeBaron, where Ervil first started out, still exists. The people there are trying to put the violent past behind them, but they end up in the news again in 2019. 3 cars were crossing the border from Mexico into Texas, and then the cars are ambushed. Inside the cars are mothers and children, and Mexican officials say they think the victims were mistaken for a group affiliated with the Sinaloa cartel. And it's finally over. 33 people have been murdered, and 9 have taken their own lives. And today, the surviving LeBaron members have rejected Ervil's teachings entirely. They've worked to create lives built on stability instead of control. Anna went to college and got married, and another sister became a nurse, something she was taught would never happen because she was taught to doubt herself and that she wasn't smart enough. And Hiram joined the army, and he is trying to do something positive with his life to better humanity. I wonder what it is about Mexico that makes all the Mormons go, you know what, we're going there. You know what I mean? There was another Mormon group who moved, I think, maybe to Mexico to also live a polygamous lifestyle. And I think they also were cuckoo bananas. Maybe I'll do an episode about that. Okay. Well, I'm going to go edit this because I waited last minute to record.
Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook at Paranoia Pair Pod. And we will see you next Friday.
Stay spooky.
Bye.